That would be fantastic. Okay, so that is now recording. Thanks, everybody. And yeah, over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is it Caroline? Yeah.
Krisha.
Krisha, sorry. We've got the right gender. Hang on. Oh, here we are. Okay, sorry. Now we'll start. I'm Tom, and I'm just starting to introduce this presentation. It's regarding the evaluation and implementation of trauma-informed approaches with people with multiple disadvantages, drugs and alcohol, criminal justice system, homelessness, mental health, and how it's put into practice using those with lived experience to change the system, review forms of practice. I'll be giving a presentation on a few slides, but I've got two other people either side of me who will also be doing likewise. They can introduce themselves.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle, and I'm a research fellow at the University of Bristol, part of the Applied Research Collaboration West. And good to meet everyone. I'm Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm a member of Independent Futures, and I've been with them for 4 months.
And hello. Tracy.
I'm beaming in from home. My name's Tracy Stone, and I'm a senior research associate at the University of Bristol Arc West, where I work quite closely with Michelle.
Thanks, Tracy. And yes, we couldn't fit 4 people around laptop, otherwise Tracy would be with us as well. It was just a bit too much. So I think we go on to the next slide. Sometimes it can be a little bit sticky.
Misbehaving.
Yeah, so let's try that one. Okay, brilliant. So yes, so just a little bit of background. I'll just move this so you can see me a little bit better. So a little bit of background on the project and what we've got funding for. So as Tom started to describe, this is a national programme focused on addressing multiple disadvantage. So Changing Futures Bristol is part of, I think there's 15 different sites of the Changing Futures programme nationally. This is all funded by the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and it's focusing on different approaches to working and supporting with people with multiple disadvantage. As Tom has explained, that can be a combination of different issues that people might have experienced. So it might be mental health, and then also combinations of homelessness, substance misuse, domestic abuse or violence, and or contact with the criminal justice system. So we've been funded by the 3 schools to evaluate Changing Futures in Bristol to understand how the services that support people who experience these multiple issues can become more trauma informed. So the Changing Futures has 3 kind of key strands in terms of its embedding kind of system change. One's around co-production with people with lived experience. One's around trauma-informed practice and including more trauma-informed practice into kind of the systems and the services. And then equality, diversity and inclusion within services. And there are leads within Changing Futures that kind of focusing on each of those different aspects. Today, we're going to be mainly focusing on the work of Independent Futures, which is a lived experience organisation working alongside Changing Futures. So what Independent Futures has been doing is really embedding that lived experience, understanding and perspective into this systems change over the Changing Futures programme. So who are Independent Futures? So there's 15 members currently, Tom and Rebecca, of whom are 2. And as I was saying, that their kind of core focus is looking at kind of bringing trauma-informed practices into services. It's been going since 2014, and its kind of previous incarnation was through the Golden Key programme, which was funded by the National Lotteries. And so all sort of lived experience members have kind of had that experience of the issues that we've just discussed in terms of multiple disadvantage. And so, yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about the work of Independent Futures and how that's done. So I'm going to hand over to Tom.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michelle. Specifically with regards to Independent Futures, known as the IF group, it feeds lived experience into system change, as this diagram shows very well. And what we do with our own, from a lived experience viewpoint, it feeds that the work that we do into Changing Futures, which itself is a program for system change, i.e. the changing of services in a constructive manner in Bristol, one of 15 projects around the country, which is trying to incorporate system change. Changing Futures itself, we're interlocked with, and they support us with supervision, with training, system change work, networking, advice on matters, vice versa. We in many respects, we see ourselves as one organisation. This separation is just a technicality, but as if we are specifically the lived experience wing of the project, with our own management team, working in conjunction with Changing Futures. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. It works. Thank you. Doesn't often happen with me. Okay. So the work of Independent Futures. When we talk about system change, it's just for me personally, I see people lived experience as the bridge. We are the bridge between the lay community and service providers, professionals, giving advice on behalf of the lay communities, or more specifically, people who have used services, on our experiences, but also how things can change. Yes, these are subjective. I think across the spectrum of many different people who've used services, you can have an umbrella of how things have been going, good and bad, and how things can be evolved and changed. I'm not saying it's revolutionary. I'm not saying having lived experience is necessarily the dominant factor, but it can just add value and more information constructively to how services can be developed, as it always have to be an ongoing development of services. We can never stand still. As people with experience in this program, we do our own research into how, or we contribute with research and how services have been running, or how we think they can be done in the future with other professionals from academia, particularly. We've been involved as members on program committees, boards within, for example, Second Step, which has the contract for the Changing Futures program, which we in effect part of. We've been on training courses and indeed running training courses, and about to do workshops on issues of co-production. When co-production is working obviously with other services and professionals, but in a bubble, or in its own separate bubble of project work and goal of achievement without the hierarchy. So that's one of our big niches at the moment. And also we've been present on webinars and giving presentations on webinars. One that comes to mind was a couple of years ago with University of Bedfordshire, where it was on vulnerable adults, and how we believe things could be construed, or how they'd worked badly or well in the past, and how they could be developed in the future. We're taking part in surveys, interviews really, called Deep Listening, with clients of Changing Futures. Those who, amongst those 60 clients, 60 would be young people, homeless, or victims of domestic violence, and interviewing them, finding out how their experiences of services and how system change is affecting them, if it is at all, and then reporting back and discussing with colleagues from academia who are helping to run these interviews, whether it be Bristol University or University of the West of England, how things have gone and how things can be done differently in future interviews, and what to take out from the research. I will now hand you back to Michelle, who will be talking about trauma-informed evaluation methods.
Hello. So I have a quick slide on the methods, and then I'll be handing back to Tom, Rebecca and Tracy to go through the results. So this is a little bit of a kind of broad overview about all the different approaches that we're currently using to evaluate the work of Changing Futures. So we've been interviewing staff. Sorry, that should actually say 16. I hope that was something I hadn't actually finished in the slide. So we've currently interviewed 16 staff. We've developed a survey, particularly looking at trauma-informed approaches co-production, staff wellbeing and equality, diversity and inclusion. And then we've sent that out to all the different partners involved in Changing Futures, and we've had 82 respondents from that. That survey in itself was co-produced with Changing Futures staff, with Independent Futures, and we'll be doing that survey again towards the end of Changing Futures to see if there's any kind of difference from the beginning to the end of the programme. But what we're mainly going to be focusing on in the seminar today is the evaluation of Independent Futures, which Tracy has been doing. And we're going to be sharing some of the results that we found about how Independent Futures really works in relation to trauma-informed involvement and engagement, and the practices that they use to support people. So just to kind of give you a brief overview of the rest of the presentation, first of all, Tom's going to share some of the results of the interviews, followed by Tracy, who's going to illustrate that further with some particular quotes. And then Rebecca is going to share a personal perspective of her experience. So back over to Tom for the first slide of the results.
You can see here from some of the interviews what were the motives for people with lived experience getting involved in system change and advice on services in general from a service user perspective. Actually, it wasn't about politics. It just wanted to change areas that, well, many areas work very well. Others could be improved looking at it from another perspective. In many respects, it's allowed people to be in a position of power, but certainly a voice that can be heard amongst other professionals. Yeah, you are theoretically you are sitting at a table, metaphorically and literally, with senior members of certain services, so whether it be Bristol City Council or Second Step, on a level playing field and being listened to and being allowed to put your view across, which wouldn't otherwise have happened. And it's not about, and it's a constructive thing. It's not about challenging or wanting to undermine. It's just wanting to contribute in a constructive way and being able to empower yourself through this work experience and networking, working and talking to other people to build up your own confidence so that you can move on from which you're not supposed to be a member for life, and do other things, increase your own confidence. And maybe whether it be as a professional in services or whatever else you're interested in life. So it's very much an empowering process, and although empowerment is used quite a bit as a term, I think here it is relevant and has encouraged people on their next stepping stone in their own developments, as well as developing services per se. Trauma-informed sport for lived experience members is there within the IF makeup and setup. For example, we have a management team who are not members of IF. They're the IF team management, and they do support you with supervision and how you're feeling. If there's too much work, or maybe you like other work, you can give feedback. It's not about progress or performance, but there's flexibility in attendance. The main concern is to protect your well-being, although we do have ground rules. There is a degree of punctuality is still expected and conduct within meetings. Inclusivity and tolerance of other people, as well as whatever trigger factors come into it. These things will come and go, but there is an acceptance within the group that we don't have to be competitive with one another. We're not competing against particular agendas. We're all here. We come from had difficult experiences, but we are wanting now to contribute to society, our own development, and our own recovery. And however, but when you do start, there is a certain amount of recovery that you have to obviously come through in order to get to the stage of starting to work with it. But this could then contribute to the next process of recovery. And so after, say, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever, you have developed further in yourself and able to go to your next stage, as well as knowingly contributed to development of services within Bristol or even nationally. I think that there is a lot of mutual support within the group. and we do help each other, and people can open up if need be. And we have reflective practice where management don't attend, but we discuss with a facilitator how things are developed, aware about our feelings and other factors outside the workplace which may be affecting us, because it is relevant. I think all in all, it's about building self-confidence, self-worth, self-belief, and that actually, when we have setbacks, they're not permanent, and recovery is a long, ongoing process. It's not a fixed tick box. That's where your beliefs get to by the end of matters. And this is certainly, I found out help. A lot of other people have found out a help. We're in a stronger position now, a lot of us, than we were had it not been for if. And finally, I'll pass you on to my colleague Rebecca.
I think it's Tracy next for the next one.
Oh, is it Tracy? Oh, well.
Yes, thank
So
you.
it is, sorry.
Don't worry.
Thank you, Tracy.
No, Rebecca's going to give a personal
Welcome.
perspective as well, being an IF member, after I've just really expanded a bit on some of what Tom's already said. So thanks so much, Tom. I think that's been so far a really good introduction about, and description of how IF operates as a group, the sort of things that they contribute to, the kind of work they get involved in, and then finally a bit of a description there on sort of mutual support and personal growth through this process, I guess. So I'd just like to just take a breather and step back and think about this from a slightly more theoretical point of view, because there's all this wonderful stuff happening. There's clearly something quite special happening here. And it might be helpful just to think about the 6 trauma-informed care principles from SAMHSA, which I guess many of you are familiar with, so please do forgive me if I'm teaching you to suck eggs here, but it gives us a nice framework to look at some of the work, some of the main themes that came out of the interviews that I was lucky enough to do with 11 IF members. As you were told at the top, there are now 15, but the numbers have been growing really well recently, so I didn't manage to get everyone, but I did manage to speak to people who had been there for quite a long time, people who'd been there a couple of years, and some newer members as well. So if you just have a look at these SAMHSA principles, and then just bear these in mind as we're going over some examples of how these showed up in the IF environment. So we've got the fact that cultural, historic and gender issues are really important to informing, well-placed trauma-informed care. And this is where we're avoiding biases and stereotypes, and that we're recognising people's histories, and that the needs of people are responded to in terms of their particular gender, racial or ethnic sort of backgrounds. And then we've got peer support, and Tom's mentioned a little bit about this in terms of examples of people supporting each other directly within the group. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. Trustworthiness and transparency are clearly very important practices. I was going to say values, but probably as a practice, it's where they have been really powerful here, and there needs to be a transparency and a consistency around how decisions are made in order to maintain that sense of trust. And then we've got collaboration, and Tom's described some ways in which collaboration has worked externally with other groups and bodies, and also internally in terms of the dynamic of the group and between the group and the management at IF. And then empowerment and choice, and I'm going to show you some really lovely quotes in a minute where people are talking about how they feel able to guide things in a direction that feels good for them and appropriate at this point in their lives. And then of course safety. So we're dealing with a group of people who have a history of trauma and various multiple disadvantages, usually a combination of. And so safety in order to engender that trust, so that people could even feel that they're able to engage at all is, that's no mean feat. So if you could move the slides on, Michelle, I'd just like to now share with you some ways in which this really quite incredible organisation has managed to achieve some of these things. So what does trauma-informed support look like in action. I'm using the same categories because these were the main themes that Tom described previously. So first of all, we talked about people who care. The IF members reported feeling well supported and supervised by staff. So I'll just give you a second to read those rather than talking over your thoughts. So the first quote there is describing, as Tom mentioned, that there needs to be a certain level of recovery in order that people can show up consistently, but also it was quite important that there was some structure and there were some requirements because people are used to living in chaos, doing things on the fly, and Tom mentioned previously also things like having to turn up on time and what the expectations were of being part of the group. And the second one, I think, talks about how people were held when they're brought in, and that actually has a very practical implications. So feeling able to ask questions because of the way that they were introduced into the group and supported to become part of the group. So that they felt that they could actually ask questions which they would never have normally done before. And you can see that's a big opening up of a big enabling factor. So flexibility was really important, and Tom mentioned primacy of personal well-being. Have a look at that quote. Okay, just to speak a bit more about flexibility here. Putting people's personal well-being and encouraging them to do so, to put their own well-being first, was really important. And the staff actually walked the walk as well as talked the talk on this, in that systems were put into place so that people could feel that they could take time out, they could attend meetings online rather than in person, they could come to meetings and not say anything, they could email afterwards the meeting if they felt they had something to say but didn't want to say it in the group. And all of this was very responsive, and you can see how this kind of practice would build trustworthiness and transparency, empowerment and choice, and create a sense of safety as per the SAMHSA guidelines. So the next one, please, Michelle. So inclusivity and tolerance. This relates to cultural, historical and gender issues. Yeah, there have been some very active attempts to broaden the scope, and as I mentioned previously, there are now more members of IF than there have ever been before, and there's been a big effort to create some diversity in that. But yeah, some people will move on to better things and some people relapsed. It's important to be cognizant of the realities of what's going on for people in this group. A certain level of recovery stability is necessary to achieve this. If you want to read that. And that's really just an illustration of what Tom mentioned earlier about needing to be in a place at least for a while, given that flexibility that you can drop in and out and take care of yourself at the same time, being somewhere where you're stable enough to show up consistently enough to be effective. The next one was identification and loyalty within the group and mutual support, and this relates to the peer support, although I do have to say here that the work that the group have done and the meetings are actually really very, very well run. People listen actively to each other. They're very productive, and a lot of the work or the of holding any trauma and any triggers that are going on is done outside of the group. So that seems to be a really enabling factor in that the members are all really well supported. And so when they get into the group, they can do the work incredibly, incredibly well. Okay. And then there's also a reflective practice which is part of the programme, and people go to reflective practice sessions with each other, and that is a way of encouraging self-growth and awareness, and also of supporting each other. Thanks, Michelle. And then finally, building confidence, counteracting past trauma, and growing some new self-belief and self-worth. I'll just let you read those. Okay, so the first one, this idea of being able to take hold of your own narrative when people are likely to have felt incredibly unable to do that in the past. That's a very powerful thing that shouldn't be underrated. And then the idea or potential for self-esteem and self-worth to grow through being thanked for something that you've contributed, something that you've given that's seen as having worth and effectiveness, even though that was pretty ghastly actually to live through at the time. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Casey. So I think we now hand over to Rebecca.
The highlight of the evening.
Thank you. Right. So for me, effective communication and building trusting relationships is key. Because if I don't feel comfortable and at ease, I won't be present mentally, and I won't be able to think, listen, or concentrate. My default settings are closed, hostile, prickly, cold, and monosyllabic, and many don't see beyond this. I've been known as uninterested and not engaged. I've been told I'm unapproachable, difficult to read, difficult to get to know, and that I'm wasting my time and theirs. I function far more effectively if I know what to expect and what's expected of me. Now, this seems obvious, but in my experience, it's often overlooked. Clear, concise communication lessens my anxiety, which means I'm calmer, my head is clearer, and I'm present in the room, far more able to concentrate and to actively participate and contribute. I've discovered I need to feel comfortable in my surroundings. I need to be put at ease. I need to feel safe. I need time and patience. I need to feel that you're listening, and I need to feel you're actually interested in what I have to say. And I need to be reassured that what I say isn't ridiculous. And if I'm tongue-tied and can't speak, I need to know that that's okay. The Changing Futures staff have been amazing at this. They've been generous with their time in getting to know me, patient, compassionate, considerate, consistent, and all the while they've been quietly observing me, working out how I tick. They offer me different ways of contributing so that I feel comfortable and able to do so. They bring out the best in me. They've helped build my confidence, and they've helped me find a voice, which is both exciting and empowering. My involvement with IF and the trauma-informed principles that are an integral part of Changing Futures and Independent Futures has been life-changing for me, and I'm so grateful to be a part of it. Thank you. If you'd like to find out more about Independent Futures and Changing Futures, please explore the links that you can see on the screen. And finally, we'd like to thank everyone who has supported this project. Thank you.